Moving on to video number 3, I'm going to start with questions I received over at Prestige Gamers, right after I tell the YouTube auditor to go fuck himself. First up, from a bite-sized taco, last year you said Nintendo was fucked in your video about the Wii U. Since then, Mario Kart 8, Smash 4, and Pokemon Omega Ruby, Alpha, Sapphire, whatever the fuck have been released this year. Also, the new 3DS has been announced for next year, so do you still think Nintendo is fucked and why? Yes, they're fucked any way you look at it, regardless of what games they release. Now, before I expand on that, you know what's funny? Nintendo fanboys still go to that video and bitch and moan. Meanwhile, everything in that video I said was dead on accurate. Now, I'm being fucked. That doesn't mean Nintendo's going out of business. They're perfectly fine in that regard. But essentially, Nintendo fucked themselves over in this console generation, and most likely the next one, because of all their stupid moves. Now, the first thing to understand is no Nintendo game is going to make up for their mistakes. Whether it's Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, they fucked themselves over badly from the very beginning with the Wii U. And as I said in the video, everything they did right with the Wii, they did wrong with the Wii U. They waited until Microsoft and Sony hit the market first, and then they undercut them on their prices. They rolled out something innovative that neither company was doing, and both ended up copying Nintendo because people like the motion controls. They undercut them in price, and they had a shortage of consoles, which drove up consumer demand. You know, if it's sold out, it must be good. I gotta get me one of those joints. With the Wii U, they completely ignored the sales data that showed that the Wii was starting to fall behind. They ignored the game sales data that showed people weren't buying their crap games. People who bought Wii games bought the big name games like Mario. And instead of waiting until the other consoles were announced, they stayed the course on their 5-year console cycle. They launched the Wii U with no games amid dwindling Wii sales and shortened game sales, and marketed once again to casual gamers. The very same people who bought Wii, let it sit on their shelf forever, only turned it on once in a blue moon, and now they're trying to sell them another console. Basically, Nintendo dug themselves a hole which they're trying to claw out of right now. Third-party studios pulled their support. First-party titles weren't being released quick enough, and the fad of the tablet screen was just a lazy way of not having an iPad. Wii U sales were awful in the 1-year head start they had, and now the console has been pretty much relegated to an exclusives machine. Most people who have the Wii U have another gaming console device or PC or whatever the fuck that they play their hardcore games on. You want to shoot zombies? You play Xbox. You want to collect Pokemon? Here's your Wii U. And as we can see in sales, the machine is not performing well at all. It's not doing terrible, but it's certainly not pulling in the sales data that they hoped for. They initially wanted to sell 25 million in the first year. An ambitious figure, by the way, and they only ended up selling 6 million. That's fucking embarrassing. I mean, they've been doing better as of late with the most recent Black Friday sales and Christmas sales, but when you look at the research and the data sales, most purchases are second consoles. In other words, people who have another console and they're buying this thing as a backup console just for the Nintendo exclusives. Now, many people will say that's how Wii U should work. You buy it for the exclusive. You buy it for Mario and Metroid. And this is exactly what's wrong with the console itself. People don't understand how important third-party developers are. Again, fanboys with their head up their asses are going to tell you that's how it's supposed to work. No, third-party development is a huge source of income for console makers. Just look at how it works. When Sony and Microsoft want to roll out the next Halo or Uncharted, they have to come up with the investment money up front. 75 million, 100 million, whatever the fuck it is. That's money out of their pocket 2 years in advance, hoping to recoup on it later. Same with Nintendo. They fork over 25 million to make a Mario game, and that's money they don't get back until the game releases. And when a game releases, they usually make their money back like a ransom. But with third-party developers, there's no cost up front to them. All that upfront cost is covered by the publishers, Activision, EA, Take-Two. And when the game sells, the console makers get a cut of the revenue. Not the profit, but the revenue. Basically, it's free money for doing nothing. Sony and Microsoft are making free money for every third-party game release. Nintendo doesn't. Grand Theft Auto, Assassin's Creed, Destiny, all games that made tons of console cash while the Wii U sat there with its thumb up its ass. While Nintendo is investing 5 million here, 10 million there, 25 million beyond that, Sony and Microsoft are making money with games just releasing on their console. Let's look at this for a second. Spend 5 million to make a game being released in 2 years, or collect $5 million for doing nothing. Yeah, now you see the difference. In the end, Nintendo is probably going to make another colossal fuck up. They've already stated their next console is imminent. Obviously, it'll be a few years from now, but let's just say they stick to their 5-year cycle once again. Every Nintendo console has released on a 5-year cycle prior to that. So if you were to take a guess, this puts their next release in 2017, which is not that far away, by the way. The PlayStation 4 and Xbox One will only be in their 4th year, and if you judge them based on their past life cycle, that's a little bit past their halfway point. That's when console features should be fleshed out, games should no longer be subject to the prior generation development. In other words, Nintendo's biggest competitors will be at their peak performance when they want to release another console. Sure, Nintendo could build a stronger machine, but realistically, what would that accomplish? They marketed it to casual gamers. Developers would need to be convinced it's something to support, and their competitors will have a full library of games at that time. Unless they plan on making a competitive gaming machine with Sony and Microsoft, they're just asking for another perfect storm once again. In all honesty, I don't think Nintendo's going out of business anytime soon, but their bad decisions continue to keep them in that fuck stage of not making money. I like Nintendo. I grew up with Nintendo. But I also grew out of Nintendo and feel bad that they're still stuck in the 90s without a lifeline or some shit. Next question from the Demented 115. If you could define gaming for someone who never played video games in their entire life, how would you describe it from the origins of video games up to today? Jesus Christ, another one. What are you writing, a fucking term paper? You know, I think this is what people did. They had homework and they sent me in their question hoping to get an A on that motherfucker. Now look, to answer your question, it really depends on the level of knowledge of video games. Are you talking about someone who's at least aware what video games are but has just never played them? Or some motherfucker from like the Umfufu tribe in Carajo land that's never had running water in their entire life and wipes their ass with palm tree leaves? You know, because there's a big difference right there. I'm hoping it's the first one because it's actually an easy explanation. Video games started out as an electronic form of entertainment with some of the most basic graphics possible, and it's morphed into photorealistic content that looks and plays like movies. We've gone from Pong to The Last of Us, and throughout the years, the technology has gotten better to make games throughout the years. It provides people an escape from the normal world. It provides them some entertainment so that they don't have to just sit and watch a TV show or watch a movie, or they're too fucking lazy to go outside and play a sport. But as for the content, it has everything you can imagine, from sports, puzzles, kids games, to movie adaptations, to aliens, to adult games, zombies. There's something for everyone, including someone who's never played video games before. Now, if I had to describe this shit to fucking Starvin' Marvin, that shit ain't fucking happening, no goddamn way. That random guy wants to know, I have a personal question for you. Have you ever suffered with mental health issues? No, I haven't. Longshot2345 wants to know, he's expecting a short answer. Yeah, you're about to get one. What was the first video game you ever played, whether you owned it or not? That would be Pitfall on that old-ass Atari. Oh, man, did I love Pitfall up in this motherfucker. Next question from Crunk Kelsey. What does your family think about your YouTube career? Honestly, only one person really knows, and they really don't give a shit. It's not like I go out and advertise, hey, I'm on YouTube. It's not like I'm fucking famous or anything. This is basically just pocket change, so really nobody knows and nobody cares. Next question from Benjamin. I'm not going to read the whole part right there. You guys can read it for yourself. But basically, he wants to know, should businesses take away rated 18 or rated mature games so that kids can't buy them? Or how would you combat that for people that do want to buy the game? Basically, you guys can read that whole thing there and see that's exactly what his question boiled down to. Now, here's my thing. Each country has their own laws and each country has their own guidelines. I don't know what exactly it is in New Zealand, but here in the United States, we have the freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It's not illegal to sell adult material, but if the law states that someone under 18 is not allowed to have certain things, whether it's alcohol, cigarettes, video games, or whatever, I would make sure that as a store owner, that items are being sold to age-appropriate customers. If that means IDing the motherfuckers, if that means paying attention to all the people that come through the store, whatever the case may be, if the law states that you cannot sell something to a minor under the age of 18, as a store owner, it's your responsibility to make sure that you do so. You can't control if a parent buys it for their kids, but you can at least make sure that the child is not purchasing this. But here's the thing, if parents are buying the shit for their kids, that ain't my fucking problem. If I own a porn shop, and a dad is coming into the store buying his 15-year-old girl a dildo, this is a sickening thought, but just go with it. I can't stop that. It's a parent's responsibility to look out for their kids, and it shows the problem isn't the store owners, it's shitty parenting. I shouldn't have to monitor your kids for you. You should do so. I just have to monitor my merchandise and who it gets sold to. Now again, I'm not sure what the laws are in New Zealand, but here in the United States, there are penalties for selling cigarettes to minors, there are penalties for selling beer to minors, alcohol to minors, but as a store owner, there is no penalty for selling something to an adult who then in turn gives it to their child. So, if the law there states that you're not allowed to sell rated 18 material to minors, then yes, stores need to enforce that, and they need to stay on point with that because obviously that's the law. Big Man 319 wants to know your thoughts on the recent terror attack in Australia. It's horrible any way you look at it, but the unfortunate reality is it's gonna happen somewhere at any given time. Look, living in New York City and seeing 9/11 firsthand, you never know when or where some brain-dead asshole is gonna strike. It's just impossible these days, from the Boston Marathon to the Spain train bombings to now Australia, which was the work of one deranged motherfucker. It's impossible to know when something like this is gonna happen, but at this point, it's not surprising. You certainly feel bad for the victims, you can relate to the families who worry about their loved ones, but the unfortunate world we live in is that this is no longer a shock to anyone. It's certainly not common, but it's common enough that every city, state, and country should feel vulnerable that one determined asshole would go out and do something like this to kill people. You know, you never wish you had to see this. You don't want anyone to experience something like this, but it's become an unavoidable issue in almost every developed country who enjoys freedom. People want to take away their freedom, they want to take away their security, they want them to live in fear. And it's why almost every country that enjoys freedom is having to fight back against these assholes to ensure the safety of all their citizens. Next up, Jim Bob Lee. In between kicking the asses of 10-year-olds over the internet and telling the YouTube auditor to go fuck himself sideways with a rusty screwdriver, what do you believe it would take for a game such as Call of Duty, Battlefield, Final Fantasy, or platformer, Mario, Sonic, whatever, to be 2015's Game of the Year? At this rate, just a complete game. You know, depending on what publication you go by, they all have different Game of the Year. They all have different criteria. I mean, games like Dragon Age, Mario Kart, Shovel Knight, they're all going to get some recognition this year in terms of being Game of the Year. And if you notice, they were all complete games. 2015 might end up being the same. And it really depends on how well all these delayed games were made during the extra time they needed development. As I just mentioned in the prior question, we have a number of games that were delayed from 2014 that are going to be released in 2015. Battlefield Hardline, The Witcher, Bloodborne, all of those games are getting the extra development they wanted. All of those games probably getting the extra development that they needed. So, the main thing that they're going to need, you're always going to need a great story that can either be on par with a movie or a book. It doesn't have to be a movie or a book, but it has to be on par with some of the other genres out there. You're going to need a game with few technical issues that shows that you had a lot of polish and that it shows you took your time to develop something right, and a variety of content to make the game replayable past just one run through the campaign. Basically, everything Destiny isn't. Next question from Swag Bar Down Hockey. Do you believe that 9/11 was executed by the American government, or that they knew about it and still allowed Al-Qaeda to continue, so that the Bush administration could have a reason to go into Iraq for oil and kill Saddam Hussein? Basically, did the U.S. government carry out 9/11 on their own people? Absolutely not. And the overwhelming majority of the shit has been bunked 10 times over the past 15 years. There was no U.S. conspiracy. The towers did not fall from controlled demolition. The Pentagon was not hit by a missile. The government did not secretly plot this out, and George Bush, no matter how much of an asshole people think he is, or how clueless of a motherfucker he was, did not plan this out so he could go kill Saddam Hussein. He wouldn't have planned this, and certainly didn't have the people smart enough around him to plan this. You know, I don't know how people could think a sitting president would plot the deaths of 3,000 people just to start a war. The absurdity behind this shows how many people are just not right in the head, and they really need to be checked out for mental illness when all the proof has debunked the majority of this bullshit for years now. Eros Neil, I don't know how the fuck you pronounce that shit. What do you think about the 3 days of darkness that NASA confirmed? They didn't confirm shit. That was a complete and utter hoax done over the internet. So that puts an end to that bullshit. I mean, fucking the internet these days. It's only good for porn and hoaxes. No, NASA didn't confirm shit. They said the exact opposite. It was a complete and utter hoax. And for those that don't know what I'm talking about, there was some kind of internet rumor that went around that Earth is going to be in complete darkness for over 3 days. Utter and total bullshit. Completely debunked. Next question from El Pancho751, and he writes a whole paragraph right here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically he wants to know about transhumanism, which is to use technology to enhance human intellect, whether it's physical, psychological capabilities, or whatever it is. But anyway, his question is at the bottom. Do you think that transhumanism is the next step forward for humans, and that we should use this technology to this extent, or should humanity evolve naturally without technology or artificial abilities? I see you must have watched that shitty Johnny Depp movie, didn't you? Oh man, that movie sucked. Anyways, the answer will always be no. I'm into technology, don't get me wrong. I enjoy when the latest advances in technology make my life easier, but let's get real for a moment. No matter how far humans advance in technology, no matter what creations we come up with, we're not going to beat nature. Evolution is a natural process, not a forced process through technology. So this idea that humans can make themselves more than just human goes against nature. It's artificial. It's an illusion. No matter how perfect humans try to make themselves, what makes us human is our imperfections. What separates us from machines is that we create machines and technology, and we do so as flawed and imperfect creatures. You can't create something perfect when the tools themselves are not perfect. Transhumanism is a venture that would ultimately fail because it's still reliant on a flawed part to make something perfect. You're relying on humans to make perfect technology so that the technology can make humans perfect. Not gonna happen because humans start out as an imperfect process. By that logic alone, natural selection has to take its course. You have to let evolution progress no matter what, because when you interrupt that process, that's when you start fucking with things. Next question from Francisco Huizar. Do you think there are bad kids or just bad parents? Unless the child suffers from mental illness, which leads to the bad behavior, it's always the parents. Always has and always will. You can understand if there are mental health issues. Fine, that's going to happen. It sucks to be a parent and admit that your child has deficiencies, but you need to do the right thing as a parent and get them the help they need. As for kids without mental issues, yes, your parents are responsible for molding you. And granted, every kid is different. Every person has their own personality. They have their own ways of thinking, their own logic, their own feelings. Some are shy, some are outgoing. But teaching a child right from wrong comes from a parent. They don't learn that shit on their own. They learn it from their parents. They learn it from other adults. They learn it from other kids. They learn it at school. They learn it from their teachers. But the number one person in which they have to learn all of their life lessons comes from a parent. So yes, when you have bad kids, chances are it's because the parents were shitty to begin with. Mr. I Can't Snipe wants to know, similar to how Time Magazine does a person of the year, if you could pick a person throughout all of history, all of recorded history, who would it be and why? I'm sure Jesus would be the popular pick right here for most people, but I would go with Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. Now, once you get past the whole thing of Plato probably molesting him or something as a student, no, really, look up pederasty in ancient Greek times to see what I mean about that joint. But once you get past the ass fucking he took from Plato, Aristotle's work has influenced history for over 2,000 years now, well before Jesus was supposedly around and certainly well after. Also, nobody doubts his existence since he actually wrote shit down, but that's another story. If you look at his impact on society between science, philosophy, Aristotle has a much more grounded approach compared to all of his other contemporaries. He was a student of Plato, who in turn was a student of Socrates. But the difference with Aristotle is that his teachings relied more on proof, where Socrates and Plato believed more in gods and higher powers. Aristotle laid out the earliest teachings of reproductive cycles in women, as opposed to where his mentor believed it was a gift from the gods. He laid out the groundwork for social norms, physics, war principles, evidenced by his student, Alexander the Great, who never lost a battle because he had better strategies than his opponents. So yes, Aristotle's teachings are what influenced almost all of history, including the creators of the Bible. His views on nature were used in applying more principles to what future scholars would learn, such as the earth changing, humans having not been the first creatures on the planet, than any other person before him. Plus, he didn't fuck little boys in the ass on camping trips. Well, at least that we know of. I mean, basically, he deemed pederasty as a way of population control as opposed to the learning experience that Plato called it. Either way, his teachings have been the most influential in history, and he deserves that recognition. So we're going to cut shit short here for video number 3, and we'll pick things up in another video. So as always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit, and I'll see you guys in the next question and answer session.